What is going on, guys? Welcome back. Commentary for you, Ryan Moody, Jimmy Smith, our MMA show. Real quick before we get started, a friend of mine, Yusuf Salal, got signed to the UFC. This guy's been through a couple regional promotions, so wanted to take a moment to thank him for his commitment to fighting and really pay respect to him making it to the ultimate UFC. Very proud of him, and I know that he has worked very hard, as many fighters that come off the regional scene have, to do this, and I hope that he has an incredible fight coming up for you guys. Now, Jimmy, big, I guess, argument through a lot of fans past couple weeks. You've addressed it yourself, but really we're starting to see another onion layer unfold with the whole Conor, Cowboy, and Stephen A. Smith. Is it weird that the UFC went from Jimmy Smith to Stephen A. Smith? Is that just a little weird to you? It's probably weirder to you than it is me, right?
Well, I got to comment on this because a lot of people have said, "Oh, Jimmy's not there anymore. Now they have Stephen A. Smith." Pardon me.
Are you allergic? Are you allergic to Stephen A. Smith?
People don't understand. He works for ESPN. He doesn't work for the UFC. Shit. Hold on.
This has never happened in how many episodes?
It really hasn't.
Maybe it was the onion comment.
Could have been. But he works for ESPN. He doesn't work for the UFC. A lot of people have this idea that, like, I left and they brought in Stephen A. Smith. It doesn't work that way. He doesn't work for the UFC. He works for the network, ESPN. So essentially, ESPN said, we want a person representing ESPN on, some big broadcasts, and they chose Stephen A. Smith. He does a totally different job than I do. He's never done commentary for a fight or anything like that. Than I did. I'm sorry. And so it's weird because people assume that I was pushed out and he was brought in, and that's not how it works. The promotion itself doesn't pay for Stephen A. Smith at all. He works for ESPN, and so it's a network thing, which is totally different. But yeah, so I had no comment on that. People act like we occupied the same space, and we don't.
The difference between you and Stephen A. Smith would probably be that Stephen A. would have said, hey, can you cut that and restart? And Jimmy just continues to go with it, right?
Yeah, I don't care. Exactly. Coffin's not going to bother me. Yeah, so that's the situation. People assume that there was one spot, and so he got it. And that's not how it works at all.
So let me ask you. I can't remember, and I'm sure you've covered this sport longer than I have, naturally. When have you ever seen another fighter come out and demand a retraction or an apology from a commentator or really any media source?
It's been a while. I can't think of anything off the top. I'm sure it's happened. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, especially nothing this big and about another fighter. That's the thing. I've heard people say he should apologize to me for saying that, but not apologize to the fighter I fought or somebody else. That's the interesting thing about it.
Well, I think now, the problem becomes this became a very public situation. I mean, I guess to start this, why do I care what Stephen A. Smith thinks? I mean, honestly, you just kind of said it yourself. I understand that he's not a part of the MMA landscape. He understands that he's not a part of the MMA landscape. And I'm not going to take any shot at Stephen A. Smith. I actually enjoy him from an entertaining standpoint in what he does. But to be very literal, this is a man that's worked for ESPN, carved a legacy out for himself. And listen, if he truly wanted to sit down and learn about the intricacies of MMA, he has every opportunity. Now I'm doing it, Jimmy. What is going on with our voices here? But he literally has every opportunity to sit down with high-level fighters, intelligent guys, and learn about the sport. If he chooses not to do that, that's okay. And if that means that when they bring him on as a guest, from what I've heard, unpaid, by the way, to help promote and push the sport itself to more casual fans, if when he does that, he creates a very, I don't want to say uneducated, but a very biased or a very simplistic or a very anyone else looks at the fight and that's what they see stance, then, in a way, I'm okay with that. Now, granted, I think the problem here is you went a little further than just, hey, I saw one guy beat up another guy really fast. And he started to discredit. And he started to use words like quit. And he started to question Cowboy's heart in a way. And maybe that was him being over dramatic. Maybe that was him filling in too many words, like I'm sure many people think I'm doing right now, by the way. But to me, that was really the problem. If he had went on there and said, man, this is a big fight. I didn't know a lot of the details about it. I know Conor McGregor. I know Cowboy. And it just looked like Cowboy only was able to withstand that one little wave, and then it was over. I don't think anybody would have complained. But the last person you want to question in our sport is a guy like Cowboy Cerrone.
The best way to put it that I can think of is Cowboy's tendency to underperform in big fights. You could call it choking, sure. You could call it, once again, underperforming. You could call it his tendency to start slow, whatever. It's an unconscious thing, right? It's when you choke, it's not conscious. It's unconscious. You can't deal with the nerves, whatever it is that we've seen him fail in big fights. Quitting's a choice. Giving up is a choice. And when you say somebody gave up, you're making a character evaluation of them. And I think that's the tipping point that upset a lot of people. When Stephen A. Smith says somebody gave up, they chose to quit. Choking, he choked, he didn't show up. That's fine. That's an unconscious thing, and I think Cowboy is guilty of that. MMA fans, myself included, don't like somebody who has no particular background in the sport. I don't think his education level about the sport is above, well-educated fan. Comparatively, he's not, he's never said anything that makes me think, man, this guy really knows a lot about MMA. And about other sports, he has. It's just about MMA. He doesn't sound any more educated than any other fan. And yet he's in a position of authority. And that's the contradiction that kind of gets to me and a lot of people is he's in a position of authority. He's sitting at the desk giving expert analysis, and he's always saying, well, I'm just a spectator. Well, then why are you there? Why are you up there if you're just a spectator? Or, I remember his first one on ESPN. He's standing next to DC, and he said something about a fighter, and he said something like, well, I know he's a great striker because you said so. And I'm like, if you're just saying what the other guy said, why are you taking up space? Why are you there? Right? Either you're an expert with insight that is unique, or you shouldn't be there. And I've yet to just see unique insight from Stephen A. Smith. I've just yet to see anything that makes me think he knows the sport any better than anybody else. I'm not saying he doesn't like it or doesn't love it or is not a fan, but there are a million fans that aren't in his position. So it's almost like when people said, CM Punk, getting in there fighting and, great job and great. No, if you can't compete at a professional level, you shouldn't be at the professional level. Right? If you can't do this on the level of being in the UFC, you shouldn't be in the UFC. Well, the same thing goes for broadcast. If you can't give me an insight that's somehow unique or especially educated or whatever it is, then you're just another person talking. And we have enough of those. That's one of the issues for me personally. And the idea that Stephen A. Smith talking about MMA brings a lot of people to MMA, like it brings in casual fans or something. This was said at a UFC event. This wasn't on his show. This wasn't on First Take. You're already a fan if you're watching it at that point. Do you get what I'm saying? It's not like he made this comment on his show and people who aren't necessarily into MMA are watching First Take and maybe they start looking or whatever. But he said it on a broadcast where fans who would be brought into the sport, you're already watching, guys. He's talking to a captive audience. He's preaching to the choir. So the idea that Stephen A. Smith saying something brings in casual fans, my two arguments are he's only been on big broadcasts, right? Cowboy Conor, and then it was the UFC's debut on ESPN. I think he was there. He's only at big fights. So it's the other way around. It's not like Stephen A. Smith brings a lot of people to the sport. No, the sport's already big. That's why Stephen A. Smith is there. He's not at a local hockey event, right? So there's that. Those are the flip sides to the coin that he's bringing in casual fans. No, he's only at big events and he's only giving it his opinion on a broadcast. You're already a fight fan watching it. So it's to me, the arguments of why it's good. I don't think it's ever good when someone when someone says an opinion that can't be backed up, that's never a good thing. If you ever seen Undisputed with Skip Bayless, who I cannot stand, and Shannon Sharp, they've said things about MMA that were just ridiculous. Like they just literally have no idea what they're talking about, and it's painfully obvious. I always think that's bad. And you could say, well, the mainstream media is talking about it. It's good. I've read mainstream articles in the New York Times, LA Times, who had no idea what was happening. Like the fighter won by jujitsu, like no clue. The language, the verbiage, they had no idea what they were talking about. That's never good because it's just misinformation getting out there. So the idea that a big name or a big person talking about MMA is automatically good, whether they're saying anything good or not, I disagree with that statement. I mean, we have enough people saying ignorant things that can't be backed up in any way all the time. We don't need other people doing it. Whether you agree with Stephen A. Smith or not, the issue is whether or not he, as an analyst or an expert on a desk, has anything special to bring to the table. And I so far I haven't seen it.
Okay, some counterpoints. Number one,
please.
You kind of listen. There's no two ways around it. You kind of broke your own argument. Number one, he's there for big fights. Big fights are what is bringing in casuals, okay? A casual fan may not care about Stipe DC, but you sure bet they're going to watch that Conor McGregor fight. So if they see Stephen A. Smith, who they recognize outside of any other commentator aside from Joe Rogan, then that helps bring levity to them. They instantly connect. They recognize, hey, that's Stephen A. Smith. He's there. This is a big deal. Maybe I should pay attention to this more than I am. So that would be my first.
But you already bought the pay-per-view. You already think it's big. Conor brought in those fans, not Stephen A. Smith. So my argument, and I understand what you're saying is, my argument is you already think it's big because you don't normally buy pay-per-views and you bought this one. So this is a casual guy, right? A guy who's not necessarily an expert at an event that brought in a lot of casual fans. You know what I mean? It seems like Stephen A. Smith himself is piggybacking off an event that draws in casual fans rather than, casual fans might want or listen to the opinion of Stephen A. Smith because, no, they're already there. That's what I'm saying. I think Conor brought in those casual fans, and Stephen A. Smith is there because it's a big audience. So the idea that Stephen A. Smith makes it bigger or better or draws in people, he's only at events where people are already drawn in. That's what I'm saying about that contrast. You know what I mean?
I do, but at the same time, when you bring the monster trucks out, you expect to see Gravedigger, right? They expect to see the biggest names ESPN has. And I think he just plays part of that. Now, you could pretty much look at that either the way you or I just construed it, but I think, in a way, number one, ESPN, he's earned the right there to be at the biggest events if he so chooses. And number two, they may want him at those larger scale events because he brings a certain gravity as a personality, whether we like his ability to articulate MMA or not, he brings that to the table. Now, the other part of this is unique to MMA. We have a commentary setup where you don't always have to have competition experience, whether it's, fighting or whether it's grappling or whatever, wrestling, whatever the case may be. You don't always have to have experience to actually be put on a broadcast. For better or worse, you could make arguments all day long on that. You're uniquely qualified to make those arguments, by the way. So when you have a guy like Joe Rogan, who everyone loves, right? Who's never competed, who's never fought, at least, in a competition standpoint.
Yeah, never competed. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly. Skilled, but hasn't been in there.
Oh, absolutely. Very skilled jiu-jitsu practitioner, extremely knowledgeable. But if you're a suit sitting in ESPN, you're looking at these two guys and you're weighing your options. They could simply look at them as, okay, one's a comedian, one's a, announcer, commentator that we have. So they may look at them in a very similar light, even though as a fan, we're endeared to Joe. We love Joe. We know Joe. Joe's like our buddy, right? He's our grappling buddy that we know. So I think there's kind of that. A few people may not totally understand that from the ESPN side of this. They're just trying to do what they think is best for their broadcast. Now, like you said originally, it's never good. Yeah. This issue is never good. When the comments made overweigh the fight, there's a problem. No matter who makes them, whether it was Joe, DC, I don't know, throw Kenny Florian in there, bring back Brian Said, I don't care. Whoever makes the comments, when the comments overweigh the fight, there's a problem. No matter who says it.
One thing I will say, I agree completely and one thing I won't take away from Stephen A. Smith, or I won't berate him for, however you want to put it. I really like Stephen A. Smith about other sports. He never, to my knowledge, played professional basketball. He never, to my knowledge, played professional football. He was never a boxer. He's commented, when I say no expertise, I don't even mean he did it. Max Kellerman was never a professional boxer. Somebody told me today he boxed Golden Gloves, which is great. But Max Kellerman has said really astute things about boxing. And I really appreciate it. I don't care that he never was a professional boxer. Steve Farhood, one of the most knowledgeable boxing guys I've ever met, was never a boxer. Okay, Al Bernstein, never a boxer that I'm aware of. They have expertise, though. And expertise and experience aren't the same thing. Luke Thomas never fought professionally. Very, very knowledgeable in the sport. So I wouldn't say Stephen A. Smith doesn't have expertise because he never did it. Plenty of people who never did it know a lot about it. They've been in it for 20 years. They've been in the trenches. They've been in the gyms. They've been following sport for a long time. Whatever. You're a journalist. You never fought. That's fine. I'm not one of those people. What I mean is Stephen A. Smith has never demonstrated to me a level of expertise worth listening to, not even based on his experience. Luke Thomas has shown a level of expertise where when Luke talks, I listen about the sport. The fact that Luke never fought professionally is not an issue for me. Joe Rogan has demonstrated a lot of expertise. The fact that he never fought professionally doesn't bother me. So I don't disrespect Stephen A. Smith for never fighting. That's fine. I mean simply on the level of, I keep saying it, but expertise he displays. I've never heard anything out of his mouth that made me think he knows more than, once again, a moderately well-educated fan. And that's the thing. And I've heard that from other people who didn't fight. The names I mentioned have said things that make me go, man, that person really knows what they're talking about. I haven't heard that from him.
You know, like I said, I think ultimately there's a lot of this that got blown out of proportion by fans. There's a lot of things that people ran with. But ultimately, I think the biggest problem I have in hindsight to all of this is Conor McGregor asked Stephen A. Smith to apologize for what he said about Cowboy Cerrone. When that happens, that, in my opinion, has to be honored. That is literally the person that beat the person that you're talking about, saying, hey, you weren't right about that. You need to apologize to him. That should have happened. And I think if it did, I think if he came out and said, listen, I was caught up in the moment. I used a poor choice of words. I wasn't expecting to have to give any analysis here that I was actually pushed into. You could word this 100 different ways. But in my opinion, you need to respect the winner or the loser. And if you don't, the instant one of them comes out and demands that you apologize for what you said, there's no more argument. There's no more question. That is something you should be obligated, as someone that respects the sport, you should be obligated to do. And to my knowledge, I'm hoping that he reached out to Cowboy privately and said whatever he needed to say. But the other side of this is, listen, Cowboy might not get any pay-per-view draws, but I promise you, the next time Cowboy sees Stephen A. Smith, he's probably going to have, maybe he's going to take his cowboy hat. If Stephen's wearing it, maybe he'll just take the cowboy hat and leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, part of, and you know, I made a YouTube video about it when this first came out, and one of the things I said is, when I've said comments about a fighter on air, I got to deal with that fighter at some point. You know, if I say something about a Bellator fighter, I'm going to see him again. I am going to see him again. And I've had fighters get upset at what I said about how I scored a fight or something like that, and I've stuck by my guns every single time. And that's part of what I mean about being in the trenches. When Luke Thomas has an opinion about John Jones, and he says that opinion, what happened at that press conference? John Jones refuses to answer his question, and Luke had to sit down, and it was an embarrassing moment for him. But you're in the trenches, man. You got to deal with it. You're going to be in the locker room. You're going to be with that team. You're going to be in situations you have to answer for these things. I've never seen Stephen A. Smith at Jackson Wink or the BMF Ranch or American Top Team or any of the places where he's going to have to run into somebody who he said something about. Now, I respect Stephen A. Smith, generally speaking, about other sports because he has said harsh words about NBA players and then had to deal with them. But this is a world I don't think he's in that much. And so that's the other side of the argument. When you talk about, Cowboy might react like this or might react like that. Well, anybody who's in it has to deal with these people eventually. And what I likened it to is somebody making fun of a city on a nightclub in a comedy routine who's not from that city. We don't like tourists coming in and telling us about our town. And it's that idea that he comes in for big fights and then we don't see him again. He's not at every UFC event. I never saw him at a UFC in 2018 when I was working for him. So it's are you in it, or are you just in it enough for the big fights? As you said, when the casuals are there, he's there, and then he rides off and does his other stuff, and he might jump in 2 or 3 times a year. Then can you, question a fighter's character when you don't have to basically stay in the environment, stay in the sport? That's an interesting question. Now, bear in mind, I'm not even saying Stephen A. Smith is wrong. I don't know if Cowboy gave up or not. I wouldn't say that because I don't know what's in the man's heart, and I'm going to question his character unless I have a damn good reason. And I feel like I would as a commentator, having fought. That's the line, is that having fought and having been in there, I feel like I can make those judgments. And even then, I'm very careful about it. Not that I'm worried about the fighter's reaction. I don't care about that. But for my own integrity, I don't like questioning somebody else's integrity unless I'm sure. And Stephen A. Smith, who's never been in that situation and hasn't been around the sport that much, I don't know if he has a right to make that judgment. I wouldn't say so.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, personally, we've been in similar situations. We both, I'm sure, been in gym wars. I've been beat up. I've been submitted. I've tapped hundreds of thousands of times by now. I can relay the discomfort and pain of some of these positions, but I'm certainly, unless someone's tapping to strikes, I'm certainly not even going to consider that someone would give up at that level. Have I been overwhelmed in sparring by somebody? Sure, absolutely. I embrace those moments. Those are teachable moments. Those are good things to happen. You're not going to beat everybody up. You're not going to have every sparring match turn into a gym war. But once you've experienced it, you understand what it's like to a degree, and you can relate to it a little better. I don't know that Stephen A. Smith has ever done that. And not that that's credibility for saying that you can discuss those things openly about somebody quitting, but you certainly, in a way, open up yourself as an honest person and say, yeah, in a situation like that, I have quit. If somebody comes to me and, frames me for an elbow and I know that it's going to hit, yeah, maybe I will quit. Maybe I will only, I know my limit. I know how many times I can go before I'm done. I don't think that he's experienced those. And I think a lot of people saw that as a limit of disrespect. And I think that disrespect carried over to Conor. And I think it's certainly, like I mentioned earlier, Conor had the last word in this, in my opinion. When Conor said, respect this man as my opponent, respect the performance he put in, whether you think it was him quitting or giving up or not his best or whatever it was, that was Conor's word. And if Conor's word was he was an honorable opponent, apologize for what you said, then that's all that needed to be stated. And that should have been the end of it. Unfortunately, it wasn't, and that's why we're talking about it.
It won't be.
It won't be.
It won't be, yeah. No way.
This will not go away anytime soon. But we appreciate you guys checking this out, and we will be back very shortly with more commentary.